Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 2022 budget markup for the fiscal year budget, fiscal year 23 budget. The way we'll work this today is we'll have some opening remarks with Dr. McDade, a budget update with Mr. Wallingford, who's our Chief Financial Officer. I'll make some remarks regarding the ground rules of the markup, and then we'll have board discussion, and then once the discussion's over, we'll close the meeting, and then next week at the school board meeting scheduled for next Wednesday, we'll approve the final budget. So I'll turn it over now to Dr. McDade, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Good evening. I would like to start by thanking the board for your collaboration throughout the budget season. We've made several changes to the budget process this year to ensure greater transparency, fiscal responsibility, and most importantly, better alignment of our investments to our priorities as outlined in the 2025 Launching Thriving Futures Strategic Plan. As we have continuously communicated, this budget is teacher and student centric, with the bulk of our new investments going to support classrooms and schools where they are most needed. As a board, you have been intimately involved in this process, and I appreciate the time and thought that you've dedicated to input, feedback, review, and evaluation of the FY23 proposed budget to ensure that as a school division, we maintain high levels of financial accountability and remain hyper-focused on advancing student academic progress. Tonight's budget markup will include additions to the proposed FY23 budget that we presented in our February board meeting, and the markup is based primarily on board member feedback. And so we prepared proposed additions that Mr. Wallingford is going to walk us through this evening for full board consideration. So at this time, I would like to ask Mr. Wallingford to provide us with the additions to the proposed budget and the total allocation that would be added to the budget that you reviewed earlier in February.
So thank you, Dr. McDade, Dr. Lateef, and members of the board. The slide that you see up here lists those additions that have been added to the budget at this markup session. These additions are a function of, as we've spoken about over the past several weeks, the outcomes of the efforts that are taking place in the General Assembly right now. We're hoping, actually I've been speaking with Jim Council almost every day over the past week or week and a half, and I'm actually hoping that we get this finished sooner than later. Early April is what I'm hoping for right now. So let's jump into the numbers. There are about 10 items here. The first one you see is small school supplement has been added for the Nokesville School, Pace West, Porter, and Pennington. And those are for each school, 2 grade 12 teachers. The second item you see are two FTE coordinators of student activities. Those will support operations that Ms. Goss manages. The next item you see is an additional staff attorney, grade 20, at about $200,000. The next two items, 3 FTE, that is actually a typo. I want to raise that to your attention. There are actually 4 FTE there. 2 elementary, 1 middle, and 1 high support for our level associates. The next item is 33 FTE special ed chairs that will be at each of the schools, each of the middle and high schools, INS, TNS, the Nokesville School, Independent Non-Traditional, and Pace West. And those are each grade 12s. The next item you see 2 FTE supervisors of sustainability of federal programs. Those are 2 grade 18s. And then 2 administrative coordinators of sustainability of federal programs. And those each are grade 14s. The last couple of items you see here on the list, admin coordinator to support our robotics programs, 1 FTE executive assistant, and then finally, a $2.5 million reservation for fuel for transportation As all of you, I'm sure, are aware, we have uncertainty in Eastern Europe, and prices are actually escalating right now. And so we intend to reserve about $2.5 million to cover that eventuality next year. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes the additions, and we are prepared to answer questions or take comments from the board.
Okay. So typically, the way we set up this meeting is the board will go around the room to make any comments. We'll just probably go in the order we're sitting in, and ask for any consideration to the budget, if they'd like anything added or subtracted from the budget. If so recommended, then we would take a vote. That it's part of markup. That's what this is.
We don't have the regular markup rules or anything like that?
This is that is the markup rules.
She's saying that we don't have the normal rules for markup and that it's listed as a discussion. Is that on, when you're going around initially, are we adding or subtracting or making recommendations during the initial comment time? Is that how it's going to work?
I think, Mr. Chairman, may I?
Yeah.
I think the proposed additions here are the additions that the
Yeah.
board members have already reviewed and made in advance in preparation for the markup. And so all of the additions that we're proposing came directly from board members. Exactly.
So if there are any, the board members can make a comment. If they have any concerns about anything in the budget, they certainly can bring it up at this point, and then we'll address it as accordingly. And if they have no changes to recommend, if they want to speak to sort of the, what they're happy with in the budget, that's perfectly fine as well. And then once we complete that discussion, we'll take a straw poll. If everyone supports the budget as is, this will be the budget that is brought to the board next week.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if, I'm not sure that we could take a straw poll when we're not really, I mean, we wouldn't have any final changes at this point. Wouldn't that just be best for our meeting next week? Because we're not following the process we used to follow. It's changed. We would normally do a straw poll when we were adding or subtracting things, but we've submitted most of our comments for that already, so.
So what we'll do is we're gonna, if board members are not bound, but they're off, you can pledge to support the budget today, and we expect that then to be supported next week. So that's how we do this. So I'll ask if the board members have any opposition to anything major in the budget, then as long as you're okay with it, then what gets proposed next week will be the budget that we move forward with. You certainly can offer changes next week in the final budget, but typically those changes should be recommended today, and if we can work on them beforehand, that would be the way to go.
I think that's great. I'm just not so sure with the straw poll because we're using a different format, that's all.
But we would need to have a straw poll for this evening to accept the budget as presented. So the budget that they are presenting has the changes in it that have been asked for, and that would be what we move forward with unless we make changes tonight. So whatever we do tonight, we need to at least come to an agreement like we normally do, and then that way we're all in agreement when we move forward to next week.
Thank you, V. I think for the sake of next year's, if we could go back to having our rules and regulations printed out for us, and this is new, this is a little bit of a change from what we did in years past, so I think that's where the confusion comes in, but I think that would be helpful. I mean, when we have new processes, these things come up as we go along because it's lessons learned, and I would advise maybe we do that next year to clear this up.
That being said, if anyone has any recommendations, meaning if you oppose anything up there on the screen, or you want to add anything up there on the screen, you certainly can make that known today. And then the board would consider, approving that or not approving that. And if not, we would then approve these changes and add them to the budget that will be presented next week. So I'll start with Ms. Jackson.
Thank you, Dr. Lateef. So I am I have more comments on the budget, which I can make later. I just have, I know I asked already about the salary adjustments and then the graphic organizer, because I'm like, they would help explain things. But not now, but in the near future, before next Wednesday, possibly, could we please get what it looks like for classified personnel with the salary adjustments, including teacher assistants, and like what happens with their salaries? And then I just have one question that I was unable to ask before this meeting, which is maybe we could speak more to the K-3 size reduction program and revise costs for qualifying schools. And then those are just the two questions I have. Thank you.
Can you clarify the question about the reduction?
I took it from the summary page in here. It was just the title of the, on page, I think page 20. It's not in that one. I didn't have it prior. It's in the smaller one that we got. And it just, and it's just the K-3 class size reduction program, revised costs in qualifying schools. Page 20. I was just wondering what it is. I'm not questioning it. I just was curious.
Okay, what's your question again, now that we got there? I'm sorry.
I was just wondering what it was. The K-3 class size reduction program adjusted for revised costs and qualifying schools.
So your question is, what is the K-3 class size reduction grant? The K-3 class size reduction grant is additional funding that Prince William County Schools receives from the state to actually reduce class sizes at qualifying schools. And so that's an adjustment that takes place every year when we, very good, when we open schools, when enrollment changes at schools. So that's one of the things that we refer to as baseline adjustments sometimes that are technical in nature and get changed every year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Zargarpur.
Thank you, Dr. Lateef. I had most of my questions had already been answered in our meetings and things like that. So I just want to double back on the reservation for fuel. How did you arrive at that number? I mean, you know I like those.
Thank you so much for that question. So what we typically do is we track the barrel price of fuel. Mm-hmm. I'm going to kill you on this question. I'm sorry. We track the barrel price of fuel. We actually look at that and correlate that to pump prices to try and get a rough idea of what we think. The problem with doing any of that today is the fact that Eastern Europe has created a situation where nobody knows what's going on. We've seen 10%, barrel prices went up about 10% in an hour yesterday when President Biden announced that we were not going to allow any Russian oil into the United States. So here's the calculation that we did. We spend about $4 million a year on fuel for our vehicles, roughly $4 million. And I said, what's 10% of that? Okay, it's 400,000. I said, if we have a 40% increase in fuel over the next full year, and so this really is, this is a rough guess at what we expect to protect ourselves from absolute uncertainty right now in these markets.
Are there other energy costs that are expected to go up as well? I know natural gas gets talked about, and I've heard people say that their electricity has gone up too. Are we looking at those things as well?
So the expectation is not only that costs for fuel will go up, but costs for everything are going to be going up over the next year. So that was taken into consideration when we built the budget already. If you recall, we had a 7% COLA in place for materials and supplies. So we've taken that into account. Again, this is about as uncertain a time, economically as one could have.
Right. Okay. So thank you. The other thing I just want to, I really like that we, I really like that we put the special ed chairs in. And what are we doing for elementary? Are we sharing some coordinators between elementary schools as well? Are they going to get a little support with that as well?
This ask was primarily for where middle school and high school were seeing the bulk of the case management needs. And again, this was a direct ask from one of our board members based on feedback from schools and constituents. And so, in looking at this, if we consider expanding for next year, elementary could potentially be included if we look at need, but we looked more so at what the need was and then where the dollars could go in terms of a limited amount of dollars that we have. And so like other things in the budget, we would have to do some kind of a phased approach. We couldn't do everything all in one year. And where we're seeing the greatest demand for special education chairs would be in the middle schools and the high schools.
I recall last year that we added some sort of special ed positions that were supposed to kind of help that in elementary, but I don't remember if they were quite that kind of position. That's why I was asking. So, okay. All right. I'm good for right now because everything was very, very well prepared and I had my questions already answered. Things that were sitting in my head were already answered in the presentation. So I'm going to sit and listen. Thank you.
Mr. Wilk.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Just a real quick question. I thought in previous discussions we said the military liaison coordinator was being fully funded by us because I'm confused on page 114. It says a 0.5.
That's probably an error, so
Okay.
thank you for catching that.
Okay.
It is going to be a full FTE. And just confirming that that's a new, because we had grant funding for but so we are planning for a full-time position.
Thank you.
So that's an adjustment that'll be made.
Thank you.
Ms. Jessie.
Mr. Wilks, you done?
Will we get a final round after this?
I know. First of all, I just wanted, the process this year has been phenomenal because many of my questions were answered. For clarification, the 2 FTEs for supervisor of sustainability of federal programs, could you just kind of describe what that position involves?
I think Rita Goss, our Associate Superintendent for Teaching and Learning, will be better prepared to really address the roles and responsibilities, but this is in direct response to the need to address compliance, particularly when it relates to our EL students. Okay. So, Ms. Goss, I'm sorry.
Sure. Good evening, Mrs. Jessie. Good morning. Good evening, board members. So that position will actually be someone who is going out to schools, who's making school visits, observing in classrooms, looking at this expenditure of funds out in schools, ensuring that the positions that we are, the FTEs that we're using dollars for, as well as the materials and resources, are being used according to the grants, but also that we have compliance with the services and support that we're giving to students under those grants, such as Title III, Title I, and our other federal programs, Head Start, preschool programs.
Okay. Will there in that position, will there be a position for someone to, do you have a grant writer, a person who writes grants for the county? How much would that be under that particular position?
No, currently the grants person is in the office under Dr. Casada, but the title grants are typically written by the directors who oversee those grants, and then they go through an approval process that goes through me as the associate and also the superintendent and others like Mr. Wallingford.
I'm very familiar with that. I was a Title I supervisor, and I realize that. I'm just asking, do we have someone on board to, do we have enough people on board to write? There are so many opportunities for money, it seems to me, that have we looked at maybe more help in that particular area? I'm not asking that you add to the budget now, but down the road.
That's something we can consider in terms of grant writing, but these positions were specifically for EL programming support, compliance, because we want to make sure that we're in compliance with the federally mandated support that should be provided for all of our English learners. So those 4 positions are specifically for that. And grant writing would be a different function, is something that we can
Yeah.
consider.
Well, I just want to say again that I thought the process was very smooth. I thought that each one of us had an opportunity to present our items of concern and the additions, and I love the justification statement. In other words, if you want this, you want to cut this, you want to add, what are you going to cut? I thought that was very interesting because it made us really think about the cuts that we really needed. But I just want to commend you on the process. Thank you.
Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my first question is a small question, that the one full-time employee executive assistant grade 9, is that to support the coordinator for robotics, or is it just because it's, I'm assuming that because it's below it?
No, that one's not for, that's actually for, Ms. Botello came on board, all chief officers have an executive assistant to
Oh,
support them.
so that's
But
for
she
the-
was never, she never had
got a
one,
person.
right. And so, as you know, she does a lot of the work to support the superintendent's office with family and community engagement, as well as board liaison support. And so right now, she's been functioning without any secretarial assistance, so that's what that's for. The coordinator for robotics, that's a totally separate position based on, asks around support. We only have one person for robotics right now. Our robotics program is phenomenal. I would say one of the best in the state. Which is evidenced by the number of teams that we had go to the state. And so you probably are not surprised to know that there's only one person that is coordinating all of that. It's a huge effort. And so an additional assistant, a coordinator to support robotics is definitely needed.
Okay, great, thank you. And then I was curious, in the executive summary, new resources, there are a couple of things in here that I just didn't know, I just don't know what they were for, but they are the one-time learning and achievement central school-based setup, and then a few lines later is another one-time learning achievement central school-based setup. And that happens a couple of times in there, and I just was I just wasn't familiar with what exactly that was. There are a couple of other, let's see, there was a one-time positive climate and culture setup, and then a different line, one-time positive climate and culture setup program with different amounts. Could I get a little more information on what that is?
Sure. Thank you, Mrs. Wall, for the question. Those items that you see that are appended with the word setup, the phrase setup, those are new programs, and we're providing additional funding just to get those programs up and running. It could be for things like desks and chairs, computers, other equipment and materials and supplies necessary to get a person or multiple people in place and operating. Simple as that. Well, typically, in the past, you're not familiar with this because you haven't seen it laid out this way in the past.
Okay, thanks. I was curious, I just didn't know. And I guess it's tied to our strategic initiatives. I noticed that. So that helps locate it with whatever program it is that it's supporting. Okay. And then I had a question. Mr. Wallingford, you spoke a little bit to it in regards to the fuel, reservation for fuel, but obviously we're in a really volatile situation right now with budget amounts from the state not being 100% sure, and then the economic situation not being very clear, and then just, prices could go crazy. So I just wondered if you could speak just briefly, and perhaps this is more for the public's benefit, but what kinds of measures we have in place to cushion ourselves. I mean, obviously, $2.5 million for fuel is a good cushion. But are there other cushions that we have in place for this budget process? Because our costs could go through the roof, especially those things that we're doing in the CIP or the TIP, like the technology, the one-to-one initiatives. I mean, suddenly microchips could be really super expensive, If you could speak to that, that would be great.
So you raise several good issues. First, let me address the issue on the $2.5 million for fuel, if I could. The $4 million that I mentioned, that $4 million is what we spend on transportation fuel, okay? That $2.5 million is intended to cover not only transportation fuel, but other utility costs as everything will rise over the next year, okay? So that's the first thing, because yes, it appears that's a big pad if it's just for the transportation fuel. So that's the first thought. The second issue you raise is, broadly speaking, what are we doing? What measures do we have in place to guard this organization financially? And what I would say, there's really 2 or 3 things that I focus a lot of my time on. One of those is managing our balance sheet. Our balance sheet isn't something that we talk about. We typically talk about budgets, we talk about expenditures, but any large corporation or any large organization actually manages a balance sheet. And making sure that you have a healthy balance sheet is the best protection against the kinds of things that we face over the next year or two, okay? So that's the first thing, and I would say this, our balance sheet is healthy. That's something, again, that I've focused a lot of time on, okay? So you should feel comfortable about that. I'm happy to answer questions about that in more detail and maybe in another setting, because that's a long conversation. The other thing that we do is every year we put in place on the expenditure side something we call general reserve. Okay, the general reserve typically runs about $6 million. The general reserve doesn't get touched by us. Okay, it's an expenditure budget we put in place for emergencies. Typically in the past, the 2 or 3 times in my experience where we've touched the general reserve, it's been a function of enrollment fluctuations. Okay, so we have a fixed budget that we get from the county. They don't give us more money if we get more kids. On the state side, we do get more money if we have more kids. So what happens is, if we have 2,000, 3,000 more kids than expected, we only get some of the money we need to cover it. We will go to the general reserve and take that to use after we come to this board. That's happened, like I said, maybe 2 or 3 times in my experience. The other thing that we do is when we build the budget, and this would be the third item, when we build the budget, you really try to take into consideration what's happening out into the future. I mean, that's almost sounds like an obvious thing, but the circumstance we're in today really provides an example of why you have to pay attention and try to forecast what's coming, because 3 days ago, 4 days ago, we couldn't have expected a 10% increase in an hour on barrel price of fuel, okay? So putting that 7% in place, that's, we were looking and thinking. We knew that CPI was already running at 7%. It's now at 7.5%. And people you talk to think it's really 10%. Okay. So those are the 3 things that I would suggest, and there are many other things, but those are the big ones.
Thank you. That's, okay.
You good?
Yeah, I just was going to say thank you. That's very good.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Ms. Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to commend the superintendent and her staff on the budget and the process. This has been a very easily digestible budget season process for me, and I've been here for quite some time and stated over and over again how much I do not enjoy budget season, but I've come to like it. I appreciate the change in format. One of the things I appreciate the most is that we are not doing markup like we have in the past, because I think in previous years it almost pitted board members in different divisions against each other and made it a much more stressful process on top of what it already is. And I appreciate your change in attitude towards the budget and making it a more inclusive and cohesive process for everybody involved. I think this is the first year I've sat here and not seen every staff member over there panicking. And I see smiles this year. This is fantastic. This should be a process that we can all have discussions and learn and see what the school division needs, and not be worried about if someone's going to have a secretary when they wake up in the morning, or if we're paying for PSATs, or defending what we do for our students that we know our students need. And I'm extremely proud to be a part of this process. One of the things I want to start with is a question not only for my own self, but also for the public, and that is, Mr. Wallingford, if you could speak a little bit, you kind of highlighted it a moment ago when you talked about we have multiple budgets, and I had this question for you earlier. I think one of the things that we encounter from the public every year at budget season, and even more so now, is why we ask for so much money in our operating budget. How come we're doing this when we've been getting all this federal money, and where does this federal money go, and why don't we see it up there? If you could just speak to the multiple budgets and why they're not all in our operating budget, or the difference between them, I think that would be very helpful, because people will come to our meeting next week and be like, well, what do you need $1.5 billion for when the federal government or the state has given you money? You should just use that. So if you could start with that, I appreciate it.
So, Mrs. Williams, thank you for that question. This budget, this general fund budget, does not include federal dollars associated to the pandemic. Okay, that's the first thing I'd say. We've received about $220 million in federal funding in the form of ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, GEAR, ESSER set aside, FEMA. I could give you a variety of acronyms. Okay, what did I miss? CARES, okay, CARES. There's multiple sources of funding that we've been receiving. There have been additional funding sources, for example, for special ed specifically, okay, and Title I specifically through ESSER funds, okay? So lots and lots of sources that add up to about $220 million. All of those funds have been received mid-year, okay? So all of those funds have been added to the budget as we've received those awards. Okay, one of the things that finance folks like myself try to do is try to make budgets and financial statements comparable year to year to year. And so an infusion of $200 or $300 million in federal money, if we had actually put that in the adopted or proposed budgets, would make things look crazy, okay? To your question about the need for that $200 million, well, I think the need is there. We've lost about 2 years of normal instruction. The amount of funding that we have in place and that we're using right now, frankly, we could use more, okay? Citizens won't see those numbers in this budget book, but they can see those numbers in other documents that we have and other documents that we've placed out on the internet. So it's a very good question.
And then just to follow up on that, I think that the other thing that strikes at the heart of that is, at least my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that a lot of all of our pandemic funds have to be spent in a very particular manner. We can't just throw them into our operating budget. A lot of those funds are non-renewable funds, meaning once they're gone, they're gone. So we probably wouldn't be smart financial practice to hire someone who's going to be in the school division for years on end out of money that's only going to be here till next year. If you could talk a little bit more about
Sure.
that.
So that's what Dr. McDade and I were just speaking about. In fact, she should become a finance person. There are two or three issues. One is, you're absolutely right. The dollars that we're receiving from the federal government routed through VDOE, in many cases, and in some cases that we receive directly from the county, if you recall, okay, those are very specific in their uses, and each one is different than the other. Okay, so what we use those funds for are specifically laid out, and the level of scrutiny placed on those funds through audits is multiples of times higher than our standard dollars. There's all kinds of requirements. We've already had some audits done on some of the earlier funding we've received, and I can't say enough about the folks over here and the folks back in the finance office who have been managing that process. It's been a big challenge, okay? The other big issue with regard to those dollars is they're one-time funding, okay? And that creates obvious problems from a budgetary standpoint. One-time dollars, we get the dollars, we go out and buy people. If we hire staff with those dollars, they either have to be absorbed into future budgets or they have to be let go at some point in time. So while the money is great to have, it does create efforts for us. We could use more of it, certainly. I think that answers your questions.
It does, and along that line, I think when people hear say us as a school division say, "Oh, we could use more money," if correct me if I'm wrong, I think when you say that, and at least what comes up in my mind is that as a school division, just like many school divisions in the state, we haven't really been accurately funded since the recession. I mean, it looks like if I'm an average person and this is not my day-to-day job, and I read in the paper school board budget is $1.5 billion or however much it is, I would think, oh my goodness, that's a lot of money. Why would a school need that much money? Why do they keep asking for funds? And we don't have that conversation a lot in the public of the fact that our dollars, the number looks big, but the funding isn't, we were never adequately funded since the recession. If you could talk a little bit about that from maybe operations or finance standpoint, either you or Dr. McDade, I think that'd be helpful.
Sure. One or two benchmarks real quick. Per pupil spending, and all of you have seen the slides that I'd like to show. From an adjusted for inflation basis, we are this year just getting back to where we were in 2009. And if you recall the conversations, our populations here have changed. Our populations are more expensive to provide instruction to than they were 20 years ago. And so just achieving that is a good thing. Okay. The other thing I would say is our teacher salaries. We are becoming competitive because of this budget. Okay, the work that Donna Eagle and the folks in HR and compensation have done is fantastic. And so those are the two things that I'd point to.
And I'll just add, to put a finer point on that, the work, especially with competitive wages, is just beginning. This is really just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more that needs to be done for our salaries across the board. And so while you see a huge investment in salaries, I mean, the price tag on it was much higher. Of course, we could use more money to be able to do everything in one fell swoop, but we couldn't do that. And so you'll see in the out years that we will have to continue to invest to ensure that we remain competitive in our wages and benefits. So that's important to note. The other thing that I want to note is that we do have, and I don't think that we can say this enough, we do have an ambitious 4-year strategic plan. And everything in that plan, from increasing access to advanced programming to sustainability efforts with our schools, really lays out the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of this school division with feedback from parents, from students, from staff, from board members. And in order to accomplish those goals, we have to have the investments, the resources, the funding to support it. So what you see from this budget is just the beginning of the first year of a 4-year ambitious plan. And so additional dollars absolutely would be needed. And you'll see in the budget, even with that, we took a phased approach in so many different areas where we could not fully invest in everything at one time. So the notion that we're at a place where there's enough is simply not accurate. There is additional funding that's needed to be competitive as a school division, to keep up as a school division with innovation and creativity and practices in education. And so while we're excited about this budget, it's a very healthy budget, as John has stated. There's much work to be done. We've lost a lot of ground, and keeping in mind that our unfinished learning plan is fully funded by dollars that will go away after next year. And so some of those practices we need to be able to sustain within our operating budget. So we will have to pick some of that up.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I know my board members are probably tired of me asking the same questions, but I understand that we have different people who watch at different points in time, and it can't be said enough. I appreciate the patience that you have exercised. I have 2 more things, and then I'm done. I just want to say I appreciate the tie to the strategic plan. I think it's very easy to follow, just as you were saying, what our priorities are. They're not only in the strategic plan, but they're mirrored in our budget. And I'm glad that we were able to approve that ahead of time. I'm also very excited by what I see. Say 3 more things. in this budget because back in 2017, we did this salary and compensation study, which I'm never going to stop talking about, that I am so very excited to see real implementation from that study. The positions that have been added to support our already onboarded staff. I don't believe a lot of people really remember that at that time, the study said, basically, we have one person that does a job of 3 to 4 people at almost every single level. And thank goodness that our staff is still here, especially after the pandemic and all of the hard work that they've done to stay afloat. But I especially appreciate that this budget is now providing them the support that they need before they burn out and then we don't have staff. I am especially excited about the funding for these positions. It is a very expensive area that we live in, and I think that the funding is, as you were saying, becoming very competitive, and we need that to retain our amazing staff and to bring on board new staff. And I'm excited also by the positions that we've added because it now gives room for growth where there was not before. So if people wanted to stay with the school division but be promoted or have other opportunities, they will now have that. And it also, love organizational coherence, but it does that. It puts us in line with other major school divisions, how we should be operating, how things should be placed on our org chart, people doing jobs that they should be doing and not wearing so many hats and causing conflict. I really appreciate that. I can't tell you how much I value that and how much better it'll make us run as a school division. The last question that I have is, I did not see in this budget, and I think it's probably buried under a different title, but we made a commitment a year ago or maybe 2 years ago to continuing to expand our virtual program. And I believe at the time it was an elementary, there was debate around high school and middle school. If we could just get some information on how we anticipate that to continue, I think that would be great. Thank you.
Ms. Ralston?
I just want to say that you've worked very hard for the whole school year. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Ms. Ralston. Ms. Jackson?
Final remarks or questions right now?
Last round. As you wish.
Okay, well, I'll just give my remarks then. Before I asked my questions earlier, I said I was going to come back and talk about this. And just as a few things from the budget that directly align with concern that Brentsville constituents and Brentsville staff have discussed over the last few years that I'm excited about. The salary increase for staff is important for retention and recruitment, and I know it's something that many of us have advocated for. I know that our schools, students, and staff are amazing, and I support the salary increases. And I will also continue to advocate for ways to make us competitive and efforts to preserve our amazing staff. I know that the kindergarten TAs are needed, and hopefully that helps administrators during budget time when allocating funds to have specific funds for teacher assistants. But I just want to take a moment and just tell you and your entire team that as a special education parent, teacher, and board member, I feel the voices of my constituents were heard, and there are not enough words to describe how excited I am for a number of these positions. I am so very thankful for the addition of the special education department chairs. I personally know the burden that our special education staff and the direct impact of this burden has on our wonderful students. I am so grateful to the superintendent and her entire team for listening and collaborating with all of us. This collaboration, the positions ranging from special education administrative coordinator, supervisor, more APE teachers, audiologists, behavioral specialists, gifted teachers, special education transition specialists. I mean, I could go on. It is seen in this budget that we are prioritizing student achievement and we are meeting the goals outlined in the strategic plan, and I'm excited about it, so I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Ms. Zargarpur?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Jackson said that beautifully. I think I've shared this before. Back in 7th grade, I had this opportunity to create my own school. It was an island school. We rode horses and bicycles to our classes. We lived in tree houses. That was the last time I had to, an opportunity. I know Mr. Wilk is like, no, don't talk about it. This budget reflects what our students need, what our teachers are owed, what our staff is owed. It is taking things somewhat off the plates of some of our staff. It is adding positions that are going to directly impact our students. And that's no tree houses or ponies or anything, but you know, we're getting there, right? I'm just really grateful. Ms. Jackson, thank you for saying it, how you said it. I feel the same way. It just really reflects the work that we were sent here to do. And it doesn't mean that the work is over. We still have lists of things we need to continue working on, but I'm really grateful, so thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wilk.
To your islands and ponies, here's my rain clouds. But, you know, listen, a reference to previous years of markups was mentioned. You know, I will say one major difference between this year and all previous years that I've ever been on is, one, when we're adding positions, not only are they aligned to these core values of the strategic plan here, there's a detailed explanation on how every one of these, how every one of these FTE, these in the past 6-figure ones that I would flag, and I would try to cut, like the high school second position last year, or any other, and you know what, it's funny because it mentioned the staff come armed ready for meetings like that with me. But one reason why there is this situation tonight and why I'm not asking for cuts or eliminations of positions is because it's detailed, it's explained. There's more of a narrative, and there's more than just holding up a Waby report and saying, we're behind all the other divisions in this. It's aligned specifically to this plan, and it makes sense to me, and it helps with the priorities. Not only does it encompass with the priorities, which I'll get to in a second, of my district, but I think it helps the complete picture, the complete dichotomy of the entire school division, again, going with what we're trying to ultimately do with this vision and ultimately develop our profile of a graduate with what we're trying to produce for the world that awaits the students today. So going back to, so in previous years, you know, my goal has always been to try to be a voice for Potomac families, being engaged, being responsive, and being present. And so when I come with proposals, when I come with ideas, it's under that notion and that mindset when I come and advocate for things. And looking at this budget, if you break down the core tenets, and one of them, for example, equity, okay? We talk about equity, which to some in this community is a horrible word, but look at it from a standpoint of my constituents. Equity is not only from a facility standpoint. Every year, of course, we start this meeting with me trying to cut one of your schools and move Graham Park up another year ahead, and it hasn't happened. It's died 7-1, but it is finally happening this year. Patience happened, and so if you think about it, my oldest middle school, which has students having to go to schools with like Potomac Shores, which is this mecca, this beautiful place and this state-of-the-art building and this collaboration center. Well, what about Graham Park? Well, finally, we're now looking at the fenestration project. We're looking at building this out. We're looking at remodeling some of the area of it, adding new HVAC, air conditioning, heating, at the whole process. And then, you know, if we look at, you know, responsiveness to the community, you know, I know there's still people angry that in the tennis courts that, you know, we can't just, you know, get them fixed right away like a snap of the finger at Forest Park. But in all reality and transparency, that exposure of that wasn't made aware to me until after markup of last year. This is the first budget that it is possible to get this in, and it's being done now, and we are completely renovating and redoing the tennis courts at Forest Park, along with the track now at Potomac High School. But equity is also, when it comes to sustainability and funding, not for the exterior and the facility itself, but for the students. Take Dumfries Elementary School as an example. Dumfries, small student population, very socioeconomically disadvantaged Title I school, okay? So small that they can't have a full ITC right now, a community liaison officer in their thing. Not the same funding that other schools in my district might have because they have families that can donate more to PTOs or PTCOs. They have the additional funding. Under this plan, with the funds coming and the plan, we will have a full-time ITC. We will have community liaisons in all our buildings. And a school like Dumfries is going to be able to compete with a school like an Ashland or a Henderson in my district because they're going to have that more funds for that smaller building. So that is something, and taking the legacy of my predecessor who was a principal there, the advocacy and looking out for a program or a building in that community in Dumfries is something I'm very proud of that was incorporated in this budget. If we look at inclusivity, okay, building on that environment of a community, there's no surprise, and it's not a coincidence that Forest Park is one of 2 tracks open for the community usage for health, wellness, whatever, collaboration. That is going to be maintained and that is going to be kept for those families. I'm not going to try to keep on going, but if we look at other categories real quick of resiliency and well-being, you know, last year I tried to cut $1 million worth of textbooks, another famous moment of the night, and tried to add college and career readiness counselors, right? Well, we didn't have to cut $1 million of textbooks tonight, and we were able to add college and career counselors to every one of our high schools. If a high school already had that position, now they actually can just now add another counselor. So in the end, we're still going to be able to focus on that SEL and more emotional support to our students because we are going to help reduce that caseload that this board has continued to do and has expounded on every single year since we've been here. So we have done a lot with tackling that issue. April is Military Child Month. As I mentioned, you know, it started today. For years, every year I've been advocating to make sure we have that full community liaison to help our military families with that transition readiness, not necessarily relying on a federal grant to help fund half of it, which has been great. I'm not going to deny federal funds. That's a great thing. But now we are able to sustain that and make that position our own in this division, which I think will be very beneficial not only to students in the Potomac District, but throughout this county. For 6 years, I've had the pleasure on serving on the Safe Schools Committee, and over the years, we've talked about the need for improved safety, security, and more bodies in our schools, and this plan adds another security liaison or support to each of our middle and high schools, which I think is going to make a big difference, especially use an example like Potomac Shores. Big building, a lot of space, same number of administrators, kind of a little harder to manage maybe necessarily hallway passing time. Now they're going to have that additional position to better help facilitate that plan. And being a special ed parent, I'll end on this, and Ms. Jackson brought this up, and a couple others have said this. You know, it's been an honor. Every time a parent asks me, can you please attend my son or daughter's IEP meeting, I am honored that they trust me and want me to be a part of it. Yes, it's a conflict of interest, and I tell them I can't do it, but I still appreciate the honor of being asked to be in those meetings because I'm continually advocating year in and year out for our special ed population. Wherever they may be on the spectrum, whatever their disability, wherever it may be, they might be gifted. We have to, and Ms. Williams has done a great job advocating for our gifted families here. We have to do more, and this budget doubles almost those positions that we're adding to special education. And I want to point out, because people are going to be like, oh, they're all going to be placed at the Kelly building. No, they may be positioned here. They may have an office or a desk here, but they are going to be out and about in our schools providing additional support services to those students to fully meet those IEPs and go beyond it. That is something, again, that I'm very proud of. This preschool initiative, you know, Washington Reed is a great program. Getting to go there last week and see what those little kids are doing with the VPI or the Head Start program. It's amazing. Wish we had more. I'd love expanding, or if we could expand preschool or pre-K more. A child find to get more kids off the waiting list to bring them in. That would be an ultimate goal in the future. But the fact that we're adding more staff there to support those students, finally adding and finishing the aides to those kindergarten rooms. I mean, I can't say any more about this budget. I've never dealt with something like this, and it's just very impressive. I thank the staff, Dr. McDade, Mr. Wallingford, the collective team, the staff out here that may have been worried I was going to try to cut something in their department. Thank you all. This is great, and I really appreciate the collaboration and everything we've done here. So thank you.
I feel like I should just say amen. That was great, Justin. So I'll contribute to the conversation. Maybe I'll say mostly newer things, but maybe a few repeats. They were things that I knew were issues before joining the board, and I have only been on this board when we've been in a pandemic. And so that limits my experience. But, you know, as a longtime consumer of Prince William County education, because I have two daughters who started in kindergarten and graduated. So I've been through the whole 9 yards in Prince William County education twice. So there are things that I knew were issues, things that I knew would make a difference to children and would expand their opportunities, keep them in school, tap into their talents and their interests. And so as I, you know, grew up with my kids in Prince William County, I wanted to see a change in those things, and that was some of why I ran for school board. And some of those things are, you know, seeing greater investment in the classroom, including greater resources towards special education and gifted education in particular, and expanding specialty programs and career and technical education programs, because that is the world that we live in. There are so many things that we can do to help kids embrace their own learning and set their own goals and succeed. And so, and that includes technology, that includes supporting teachers, you know, attracting and retaining talent. That includes fiscal responsibility. And Dr. McDade, I appreciate your comments at the very beginning when you said, you know, about fiscal responsibility, and that includes transparency and alignment with goals. It's not just penny pinching. It's aligning. It's taking your resources and aligning them with the goals that you see, and having a serious discussion about the goals that the division has, and that's teacher and student centric. I also appreciate that, because I think those were some of the things that I was really looking for as a parent, and from that observer standpoint. So I am pleased with the alignment of the strategic plan and priorities of the budget, as Mr. Wilk and others have stated. I'm pleased to see that nearly 80% of the funds are going towards instruction. I'm pleased that we are looking towards the larger economic rain clouds as we move forward, that we are being ambitious. This is a very ambitious budget. This is way more ambitious than I have seen in the last 2 years. But it's still important. It's important to maintain that fiscal responsibility while at the same time realizing that, you know, if we don't, I mean, kids grow up and they move on. So we have to do what we can now to help the kids that we have here and pave the way for the kids that are coming up through the program. Obviously, the biggest thing that I think is great in this budget is the competitive salary adjustments and the market-based improvements. I think that will make a big difference. And I know with inflation, it's kind of watered down that impact, but it's still really important. It's a move in the right direction. I think additional assistant principals is great so that we can allow our principals to be the instructional leaders that they need to be. I think that's going to make a big difference, actually. I mean, there are ways that we can support employees besides just giving them a raise. They're using our staff in the appropriate ways to support education in the classroom. So TAs in the kindergarten classrooms, I always used to say, like, I would never want to be a kindergarten teacher and be a room of 25 kids and be the only adult in the room. So I think that's a huge investment to have another adult in the room, a TA. Even though they're TAs, I mean, they're going to be equal partners, I'm sure, you know, with those youngest learners and establishing that foundation, setting the tone for the rest of their lives. The parent liaisons, we haven't really talked about that, but we have a very diverse community, and it's gotten more and more diverse, and we have a lot of people who don't know how to engage with their school, or maybe in their cultural background they don't engage with their school. But these parent liaisons will help with that, because we know when parents engage with their school and their students, that students have better outcomes. And at the end of the day, that's what we're looking for, is additional or improved student outcome for all of our students. And so that's a really important thing that I wanted to highlight. Mr. Wilk already highlighted security assistance, and I think that's great, including camera and radio security systems, because we live in a crazy world. And we haven't talked about it, but finance and human resources often is like the thing that it's not as directly, it doesn't seem to directly impact students, but it does in that we support teachers and leaders through those important work done in finance and human resources. So I actually am glad to see that we have added a lot of support staff to help us with compliance, with rules and regulations and our financial obligations, our federal obligations. It's really important. If we mess up, then kids ultimately get hurt. So we need help with that. Lastly, the significant investments in funding for gifted education is something that I advocated for from the very beginning, the very first time I met Dr. McDade. I said, I want something done with gifted. And so the additional gifted teachers at the elementary school level, I think will be amazing. I don't have the institutional history to know if we've ever done something quite this big for gifted. I don't think so. Because if we can get gifted education teachers in the elementary school levels, with every school, then we can find more and identify more kids, because I believe they're out there. We just don't know who they are. And our gifted teachers currently, when they have to travel between schools or kind of manage kind of this, I mean, I've met gifted teachers who were teaching in cafeterias because they were on the go, right? But now they'll be able to find and identify those kids, pull them in early, keep them engaged, and they'll be on their way. So I'm really excited about that. And even simple things like adding access to geometry in middle school for the kids that want it. It used to be you have to travel to a high school to pursue accelerated math, and that's an obstacle for a lot of kids. But now it will be more likely that kids can enter into that, and that's really important if they want to, get an advanced diploma or go into an engineering field or a computer-based field or anything like that. So that's where the jobs are, and that's what kids are interested in. So I'm really excited about simple things like that. And I just want to mention the robotics, additional support person in the robotics. I advocated for that directly. A little bit of a self-interest because I have kids who are involved in robotics, but robotics is robotics, but it's STEM, and when kids participate in fun, cool STEM, they do better in their science classes and their math classes, and that just contributes to the overall success of our graduates. And why not make school fun, And so when you have additional support to grow a good program, I think that is always a win-win. And I said, I'm sorry, I already said, and lastly, but here I go, and lastly. The expansion of Growing Our Own, I noticed it was in this budget. We haven't really talked about it, but taking that Growing Our Own program and expanding it to all 13 high schools is fantastic, because I don't know how many schools it's at right now, but we're gonna need more teachers because we have so many positions that we are opening up, like 100, here, 35 there, or not 35, but anyway, you get the idea. We have a lot of great students, and if we can, who might be interested in education. So if we can grow our own and encourage students to look at education as a profession while they're in high school, then we can get them, we can help them in their career goals. Significant investments and resources for special education. It's amazing. I expect really great things for our special education students. And others have already talked about it. So I just wanted to say, my feelings towards this budget is it's very strong, it's very student-focused, it's aligned with our priorities, and I think it's great. So, thank you.
Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There just isn't enough time for me to go into all the things that I'm excited about for this budget. Many things I'm finally seeing in this budget after about 7 years of advocating for, and it's been a long time coming. I think the only thing I will disagree with tonight is an adjective, and I don't think this budget is ambitious. I think this budget is what we should have been doing. It's a step on our already laid foundation to continue to put us in the right direction. It is something I think our staff, our families, everyone in their own way have come together to advocate for. And it's nice, as I said before, which I cannot emphasize enough, to see us doing what we have heard our staff, our public, our parents, and even our students say they need in order to thrive, not just survive. And that's a big deal. And in today's climate, when we're doing a lot of just surviving, I think this budget provides a lot of hope for many of us, and I know a lot of relief for our staff. because this is the first time I can say I've sat here and we haven't discussed, as Mr. Wilk was so eloquently brought up, textbooks versus people. I do want to emphasize that, just like Ms. Wall said, you know, we add APs in buildings. We always get a lot of comments about adding positions in the Kelly building, and I think, you know, I thought of a good analogy. When we add our APs to our buildings, like Ms. Wall said, they're there to support our principals and support the people in the building. When we add staff at the Kelly building, it's a very similar process. The effect is the same. We need staff at the Kelly building to support the people in our building, to support the work that they do. It's really important. It's a system of checks and balances. I'm so excited by the additional support our associate superintendents are going to get. I want to scream and shout upside down for it, because if people really understood, not only do they have to supervise all of the staff underneath them, but how many countless hours they spend on calls with parents, with students, and intervening in crises every single day. One of the first instances that made me realize how important they were. I remember, I'm going to pick on Mr. Bixby a little bit. I remember Mr. Bixby saying, well, I have my office in these buildings, so I could be there. And to think that, you know, individuals like him, like Ms. Catherine Porter Lucas, all of our associate superintendents are going to be able to focus on the instruction side as well, just to really take time and care to support the principals and all of the other people in the building that keep things going. It's momentous. And I know that we need that. And because they do such a great job already, imagine how much better things can be when they get the additional support. And that kind of goes for every layer of this division where we're adding those key personnel. I'm also excited too, not only that we have an equity office and staff in the equity office, that was a well worth fight. But as Mr. Wilkes said, you know, the equity, I'm the only board member that has every single school in my district except one that's a Title I school. And I cannot tell you how proud I am of my Title I schools, how wonderful and amazing the staff are, how supportive they are to their community. But to really be able to see this in our budget, from our CIP to our TIP to this operational budget right here, is amazing. I just can't talk about it enough. I'm very pleased with everything that Dr. McDade, that you've done, and all the staff and all the hard work. I really feel that you listened and not just heard us as board members, but the public and your own staff at large, and made a commitment to follow through on what it is that you've heard. And I'm very glad to be a part of the board at this time and to be able to support this budget. And I'm very excited that it aligns specifically with our strategic plan. People won't have to guess, and that's important. So thank you.
Ms. Ralston, do you have anything further?
No, that's good.
Thank you, Ms. Ralston. So I've reserved my comments for last. I, share the comments by most of the board members this evening. Dr. McDade, this, the budget is something I'm always interested in year-round, and I can't thank you enough. From the day you started, this was an effort that, putting the strategic plan together, looking at the way we do things, looking the way we need to change things. Much of that effort is seen here in our budget books and our strategic plan documents. Much of the work that every dollar that's accounted for in this budget can align very nicely with the strategic plan and our needs, historical needs that we've had for a long time here. And so I want to thank you. I want to reassure the public, my deep confidence in Mr. Wallingford, Dr. McDade, our entire staff. The staff that has been here historically has seen a recession, 2007-8, navigated the school division through those very tough times, very slow growth in the early teens, 2000s, 2010s, and then we've had a number of good years here, and we've then just managed, maybe the greatest stress on the system, and that's managing the pandemic. And our finance folks have done a great job throughout all of that. And so I thank you. And so I'm very confident that some gas prices and whatever uncertainty we have in the future, we are positioned well to handle. So I thank you for addressing those concerns, both Dr. McDade and Mr. Wallingford. Regarding the specifics of the additions to the budget, I'm very happy to see the special ed positions. Much of what you see in the strategic plan and the budget addresses areas of weakness that we've had historically in the division. Weakness doesn't mean bad. It means that these are areas that we need work on. And one is being more competitive. Donna Eagle's effort and Mr. Wallingford and Dr. McDade's effort on making our salary more competitive is a great step forward. It's the beginning. But remember, as we see more money coming into our school division, our surrounding districts are also seeing more money. So it's, not easy to catch up when we're so far behind and then we're all increasing, at the same rate. But we've made some significant improvements over the last 5 years, and this year especially. And with the fixes addressing salary concerns, Jen Wall and I talk about this all the time. We both have 4 children here in the school system. One of the things that parents really complain to us about and comment on is this: when they have a great teacher for their first child, or a great counselor, or a great principal, and then that teacher or counselor or principal leaves, and then the rest of their kids don't have that opportunity. That is it's an underlying really big concern, especially in our families that have multiple children. And the salary fixes in this budget go to the heart of trying to address some of that work, and that's recruiting and retaining our great top talent here. It's very difficult to keep top talent when divisions are paying significantly more even around us. People don't even have to move to get a higher paying job. So I want to thank you for that. That's great. One other weakness I've always felt, and I'm going to say it here because I have never been shy about, is our activities coordinator's office. I think can be doing so much more. Our schools need so much more support, and there's just been a lack of creativity, effort there, and I think beefing up that outfit is going to be incredibly important, because extracurricular activities are so important to the success of our students. And it's not just sports. There's robotics, there's debate. We had a spelling bee champion for the first time in a number of years. Prince William County took the crown yesterday, not Manassas City, not Manassas Park, so I'm very happy about that. And so there are so much more we should be doing and can be doing to support our schools in this regard. And I get a lot of complaints and concerns regarding this, and this is an area that I'm very glad we're going to start beefing up. And then with the robotics, whenever this school division puts their focus on something, whether it's robotics, whether it's a sport, or whether it's, our talent here is terrific. One of the greatest problems we have is the resources. We have great talent. We have great teachers. We have great principals. We have great administrators. We have great folks working the system. And they have done with so little for so long and delivered a really good product. But if we can just increase that a little bit, and I've always said this, open the spigot up, our return on investment is in magnitudes much higher than surrounding divisions. I believe that, and I believe our folks, we need to keep them here, and I'm very excited about the raise that's going out to, the average raise going out to division staff this year. It's very important, and it goes to the heart of the work we're doing. So I have not heard anyone opposed to the additions to the budget. Do I hear any opposition to the additions to the fiscal year 2023 budget as put up on the slide? Can you put the slide back up, Mike? Any opposition? As hearing no opposition, and Ms. Jessie let me know on her way out that she supports all the changes to the additions to the fiscal year 23 budget. As hearing no opposition, we will add this to the budget that you will all see next week. Next week will be the budget that we will then vote on to finalize, to then send over to the Board of County Supervisors office. On that day, the budget becomes our budget, not the superintendent's budget. And with that, I think we can move to adjourn this meeting. Okay.